Okay, now I have started recording. So anyway, let us. So we're going to start the fourth unit, which is nothing but Java servlets. And the servlets are nothing but they are just Java programs. But remember that these Java programs, the only difference between a normal and a servlet is that both are Java programs, but the difference is that these servlets or these Java programs, they do not run on a local machine. They run on a server. Now, server means that they use an application server to run. So servlets are nothing but server-side Java programs. Now that is what we mean by server-side, that they run on servers. They don't run on standalone machines, neither on clients. So that is one thing. Now the next thing is that we don't use a command prompt to give the input to the servlets. Servlets are called by using the user interface or any other J2EE. Somebody has raised a hand. Any question as such? Somebody raised a hand. I don't know who. Or doesn't matter. Yeah, I think it's Sana Fatima who has raised a hand. Is there any issue?
No, sir.
Okay, no problem. Might be by mistake. You just click again. The hand raise will. I mean, just disable that. Okay, no problem. Anyway, let us continue. So what we mean by the server side programs is that the input is not given by on a command prompt. Input is given, or the server programs are called by the user interface. So any input that comes to the servlets is through a user interface. Now this user interface can be an HTML program, or it can be any other request that comes from the web browser, or the servers are also called or also executed when any other J2E component or any other component from the application server makes a request. Now this component, for example, might be a JSP file. For example, JSP is nothing but Java server pages, which you are going to see in the fifth unit. So this comes, this JSP is also a component there, or we can also have an Ajax, a request coming from an Ajax that is also through a user interface or through a client. So any user interface can call the servlet and provide the input to the servlet or server this Java program to execute, or any other J2E component can call. For example, a JSP or a Java Bean or any other component can call the server. Then can call the servlet. Then the server contains every implementation or all the implementation, or provides a business logic implementation of the business logic to process that request. Now we will look at what is the business logic or how the requests are handled when we look at the programs. But remember that the entire business logic is written within a servlet. Now let us look at an example. Now we know this is a client on your left side, and we have the server can use a client can use a web browser, or it can be a mobile device also. Then on your right side we have a server. This server is a web server or an application server. Now this web server or application server will be containing your server side programs, that is nothing but in this case Java servlets. Now here a request will be sent from the web browser, from a client through a web browser. this request will be processed. Now, there is two things to process the request. One is the CGI and the other one are servlets. CGIs are nothing but common gateway interface. This was also one of the technologies used in earlier days, or what we can call as the traditional technology, which is used to handle the request coming from the clients. But now, in this web programming, we are using servlets, or we are concerned only about servlets. Now the request is processed using the servlets, and the response is sent back to the client or the web browser, or displayed on the web browser. So this is how a normal execution of a servlet happens, or a request response process happens. Now if you see, this is a three-tier architecture where we have client in the first tier, application server in the second tier, and in the same application server or a different server might be there for a web for the database or to store the data. Now the requests that can are sent can be implicit or explicit requests. Now, explicit requests are nothing but we are trying to browse, explicitly browse a website, or we are trying to explicitly click a button to, for example, registration page is there, login page is there. We are explicitly sending a data. That is explicit request. And implicit requests are nothing but the AJAX, what happens asynchronously, requests are sent to refresh the data. Those are known as implicit data or implicit request. So this is what we have is the explicit data information received from the client generated by a user interface. Always a user interface, you click something, some event happens there. Implicit data is the HTTP information generated by the client. That is, implicitly AJAX makes a call to the web server. Then let us talk about the benefits of the servlet. Servlets are obviously Java programs. So a multiple request, it's not only one client that connects to a server. There may be multiple requests or multiple clients connected to the server. So when multiple clients connect to the server, only one servlet will be running. Only one copy of the servlet is loaded in the Java virtual machine, and multiple requests are handled by that by that copy. Then for each request, only a thread is created. Like in operating systems, you might have heard about threads, multi-threading, and threads. Thread is a lightweight process. So the same way, what happens is servlet is a process. That is, only one copy is loaded in the Java virtual machine inside the application server, and for multiple requests, only or for only one copy of the servlet works, but multiple threads are created for each process. So that is how the load or that is how the processing happens, and that is how memory is efficiently utilized. Then that is what each thread saves the memory as well as the response time, because there are no copies, there are no multiple copies, only a single copy is there in the servlet in the machine and the server, and for each request a thread is created. Then most important things are servlet programs are persistent, that is their state doesn't change. So if you change the business logic or if you change the implementation, server has to be reloaded again. So once loaded, it will be persistent. Same the request and the responses are persistent. Now this is very important topic in servlets, known as life cycle of a servlet. Sometimes it is also known as the anatomy of a servlet. Now, life cycle of a servlet means how the entire process happens. Now, the very first thing is, first step in the life cycle is the initialization process. Servlets has a built-in method, or a built-in what do we say, a class is, we use a servlet class itself, which very first thing is to call an init method. This init method is for initialization. Init is for initialization. The basic purpose or the main part of init method is just like a constructor. It is going to initialize all the objects or the resources that is needed to execute a servlet. Then the next thing is a service. This service method in the life cycle, and this is the second step. This service method is actually the method which is going to handle the requests and the responses. Then the last part is the destroy method. Though it is written JSP destroy, it is actually a destroy method. This destroy method, I'll just change it right now. This when the servlet comes to an end, or when the servlet actually finishes execution. It's not the request finishes the execution. The servlet, entire servlet itself finishes the execution. And the destroy method is called, and this destroy method is going to free up the resources as well as any connections which are there to other databases. So, for example, if you consider init method, what we are going to have is, suppose if some database is used, suppose if there's some files used, suppose if there's some other services used, all the connections and all is done at the initialization step, or the init method. Then service method is going to handle request and response, multiple requests and multiple response, and the destroy method is actually going to free up the connection or close the connections from with the database or some other resources, or free up the files and the other memory locations. Now, what happens is, the first, when the servlet is created or loaded in the memory, init method is called and all the resources are initialized. Then, then the servlet will be waiting in the service method, in the service step. A request comes, the service method will execute do get method or do post method. Actually, service method gets executed, but since these are Java servlets and we are handling HTTP protocol, so do get and do post methods will be executed. These do get and do post methods depends upon how you are sending the data. For example, if you use a method in the form tag of the HTML as get, then we do get method will be called. If the method to send the data in the form is post, then do post method will be called. So whenever a request is made within the service method or part of the service, do get or do post methods are called. Then the response is given back to the user. Again, there can be multiple requests and multiple responses here. And at the end, when the servlet completes its, when the servlet is destroyed, or when the servlet comes out of the memory, then destroy method is called. And this destroy method frees up the resources. So this life cycle of a Java servlet is very important, especially these three stages, that init, service, and destroy. Now let us look at the Java servlet program. Now, for a servlet program, the very first step is to import servlet. Now, then extend the HTTP servlet class, as then override do get and do post method, because do get do post method is already built in there. So we have to override, that is, we have to write our own business logic, or we have to write our own implementation or code. Now, the request which comes from the user, as you have seen in this one at this place, this request is actually HTTP servlet request for Java, for servlets, and the response is HTTP servlet response. So after overriding, we have to use HTTP servlet request and HTTP servlet response to handle request and responses. Then response directly cannot be sent because there is no output directly on the screen. It has to be sent through as a request, which will be received by the client, and then client displays the result using a web browser on its screen. So we have to create something known as a writer object. Now, what these steps we have I'm showing you is very handy and will be very useful when you implement a servlet or when you try to write a servlet. You have to remember that the servlet program has to follow these steps. Then the last thing is to we have to explicitly handle the exceptions. Now, exceptions are this is not like a divide by zero error that it is implicitly handled by Java. We have to explicitly handle the request. So now let us look at this program. Now you may find अरे यार okay. Now you can find that the very first step I said that we have to import servlets. So a servlet program, for any servlet program, you have to use java x.servlet.asterisk. So you have to implement servlet package. You have to import servlet package, not implement, sorry, import servlet package. Then you have to also import servlet.http package. That is java x.servlet.http. Now, these two things, if you look at these two things, here we are using Java X. Earlier, you might have used java.io, java.util, java.net. But here, Java X, because this is extended packages. Servlet is not a default package which comes with Java. These are extended packages. So that is why we need to use java x.servlet.star and java x.servlet.http star to import servlet package as well as HTTP servlet package. Then we also have to import the IO java.io package. Now this java.io package we have to import because we will be using something known as a print writer to give the response back to the user. So we also have to use java.io or we have to import java.io package. Then the next thing is Java. The rest of the program is just a Java program, except that we have to use certain, we have to override certain methods. So now we have a public class, and this is the name of my servlet. You can use any name which you want. It doesn't matter. Any name can be used here. Then extends. This is very important. For normal programs, we just for normal classes what we write, or normal program Java what we write, we just use public class and this package name, and then the rest of the implementation we write. But here we have to use extend. That is, we have to extend HTTP servlet class. This HTTP servlet class is present in the Java X servlet.http. So we have to extend this. That is, we actually are trying to override the functionality of this HTTP servlet class. Now then, within this class, we have to define a method. So actually what we need to do is we need to override a method known as doGet or doPost. In this case, in this sample, I am using doGet method. Now this doGet method is already present in HTTP servlet class. Now we are actually overriding this method. So its prototype is protected, void, doGet, and the first parameter it takes is a request, which is HTTP servlet request. And these objects are implicit. I mean, the data comes implicitly to these objects. So a request is an object of HTTP servlet request class. Then we have its response, comma response. So this doGet method is actually request, comma response. So what we have here is HTTP servlet response and response. This is our parameter. Whatever name we want, REQ or RES, we can use, doesn't matter. But H is capital in HTTP, S is capital in servlet, and R is capital for request, as well as R is capital for response. But these are anything or these are just the parameters. We can use any name. Then the next thing is, as I told you, we have to explicitly handle the exception. So we are using try and catch. Now in catch, we are just handling the exception the super base, supermost class of exception, that is the top will be raised. Now, servlet exception, when it is raised, there might be some other exceptions also raised. So that is why to handle all the exceptions, we are just using exception. But actually, for this program or for a servlet, usually servlet exception will be raised. Then let us come to this body part. Now here, though we are using a request object, though I mean the request is the parameter here, but as such, in this whole program or whole statement, we are nowhere using request. We will look at how requests are handled. Let us look at what will be the response. Now, a response, as you all know, has to be sent back to the client. So response is just like an output. So we have to define or create a print writer. We have to use a print writer class, and we are using out here. You can use any name, doesn't matter. But we have to assign this out or initialize this out object with response parameter. So we will be using response dot get writer. Get writer is a method which is present in HTTP servlet response. So this get writer is getting assigned to, is called, which is a method of HTTP servlet response, and that is initialized. So out object gets initialized with the response. Now, in this out object, this out print writer, it's just like a output stream. So on the output stream, whatever you write, that is using println is a method belonging to print writer. So whatever you pass or whatever you write with println, those things will be sent to the web browser or sent to the client, and web browser interprets it and displays it. So since it has to be sent to the client, and client will be using web browser, so what we have over here is we are trying to pass all the HTML tags within double quotes. And remember that whatever we send through println or on the output stream, everything is a string. Even if you send integers, it will be considered as a string. So what actually we are doing is we are trying to pass all the HTML tags as string back to the client in this program, though you may have a different business logic. So everything is sent to the client, and that is the entire output is or the entire response are sent to the client, including the HTML tags. If you don't include HTML tags, then what happens is only the text will be displayed there. Then, if we have HTML, we will be able to present the entire content in a normal HTML fashion or presentable fashion. Okay. Now this was just the web. This was just the web servlet program we have seen. Now this servlet program, how are you going to execute? What does it have main method? Remember that. None of the servlet programs are going to have main method. And they only have do get and do post methods. So how are we going to execute? To execute the servlet, we have to first compile the servlet. So obviously, everyone knows that this servlet is will be saved because the class name is my servlet. This servlet will be stored or saved in a file known as myservlet.java. Then compiling is fine. You just try to compile it using java c myservlet.java, and the file gets compiled. And if there are no errors, you will you will just be having the output. You will be getting a class file itself. Now, let us look at how to execute this program. Just a second. Just give me 2 minutes. What is this? ये क्या हो रहा है ये? Is my presentation visible? Just anyone, you can just type in a chat or whatever it is. Okay, yeah, sure. Because I'm not able to look at that. Okay, sorry for inconvenience. Okay, let's continue that. So now we cannot directly execute the what do we say, directly execute. We cannot directly execute the Java servlet. So to execute a Java servlet, we will use the we have to use something known as deployment descriptor. Now, since these files are server-side programs, this has to be executed within a server, within the server, or within some container which is known as a web server or an application server. To do this, what we have is we have something known as web.xml file, because we will be executing Java servlets using Apache Tomcat server, or we may use WebSphere or IBM WebSphere, or we may use any other web server, but that web server has to support Java. So as such, most popular server is the Apache Tomcat server itself, which supports this. Now, what we have is, so to execute this program, what we have is we have something known as web.xml, which is known as the deployment descriptor. Now, this actually is located inside a web.inf directory of the Tomcat server. But what this deployment descriptor does is it controls the behavior of a servlet. That is how servlet works and how servlet runs. Now, the web.xml file actually contains, it's an XML file, so it contains tags about servlet and its mapping. That is, which class has to be executed, what is the URL pattern that has to be used. Now, this is what will be a this is what will be the, just a minute, this is what will be the, will look like web.xml file. Now, obviously, I'm saying XML file, so it's going to have the opening tag, root tag, web-app. Now, remember, these are user-defined tags. That is what we mean by user-defined tags, is that these are not, that they do not have any meaning in HTML, but they do have some meaning in web servers. So web.app web hyphen app is the root tag, which ends at the end. Now within this tag, for every servlet, we are going to have two things: servlet and servlet mapping. Within servlet, you can find the servlet name. That is, I can use any name here. Demo servlet. I can use. Hello. Yeah, I think there is some problem. Uh, The slide has not changed. Yeah, that is what even I am finding something uh, difficulty. I'm trying to find something. That is what is a problem. That is why earlier also I asked you whether it's visible or not. Uh, let's do one thing. Actually, there is a very slow internet connection here. So uh, I'm having a very big, there's an internet issue and even the systems issue here. So I'm really having a lot of trouble hello. Am I? I think I'm visible. Yeah, actually, I got logged out of this one. I'm having a internet issue, as well as there is a lot of disturbance here with the fourth year, final year lab, something going on. So there is. I mean, I'm not able to present my screen because there is internet issue here. So what I'm going to do is let me resolve this issue. So let us end this meeting today. No, not today. Let us look at by 12:30. Let me try to figure out the solution for this, and then we will connect again. Good.